Have you ever stood in a room full of people you once called family and realized in a single heartbeat you no longer belonged? My name is Alexis Bennett, and if you've ever felt like the outsider in your own story, maybe a piece of my journey will feel familiar. They say family is supposed to be the place that welcomes you home, no matter how far you've wandered. But what happens when the place you thought was your anchor becomes the storm? What do you do when the people meant to lift you up are the very ones who push you out? These are the questions that shaped my life from the day my father's voice shattered the silence of our kitchen, branding me an embarrassment to the Bennett name. That moment, sharp final, echoing louder than any gavel I would ever slam, changed everything. I was 18, the youngest daughter of a family where tradition meant everything and expectations were carved in stone. My father, Dr. Stephen Bennett, was the sort of man who believed legacy was a birthright you either honored or lost. My brother Connor walked in shoes polished by his approval. I, meanwhile, had a different dream law, not medicine. Justice, not bloodlines. On that winter morning, I told my family I wouldn't be going to medical school. I'd earned a scholarship to law school, and I wanted to build my own legacy. My father's response was simple, unforgettable. "You're an embarrassment. Don't come home until you're worth the Bennett name," and just like that, my world fractured. I packed my things that night with hands that trembled but didn't break. Maybe you know that feeling, the way your heart can ache and harden at the same time. I left behind a house that had always felt more like a museum than a home, rooms lined with old family photos, trophies, and memories I wasn't sure belonged to me. My mother's eyes followed me to the door, her silence heavy with the words she couldn't say. Connor didn't look up from his phone. I told myself I would come back one day on my own terms, with my head held high, but I didn't know yet how lonely or how beautiful the road ahead would be. If you've ever wondered what it feels like to lose everything except your resolve, or if you've ever faced a fork in the road with nothing but grit to carry you forward, this story is for you. Over the next hour, I want to share with you how being cast out of my family forced me to find the courage I never knew I had. I'll show you what it means to fight for your place in a world that tells you you don't belong, and how the seeds planted by rejection can bloom into a legacy stronger than pride. So settle in, friend. Let's walk this road together. Maybe by the end, you'll see a little of your own story in mine. I still remember the sharp scent of pine needles outside our house that morning, crisp against the winter air, and the way the sunlight pooled across the kitchen floor like it was trying to warm a room that had grown cold overnight. For as long as I could remember, the Bennett house had stood for something: achievement, respectability, a certain polished perfection that gleamed on the outside, even when cracks ran deep below the surface. My father, Dr. Stephen Bennett, was a man of routine and reputation. He wore his white coat like armor, his name stitched in blue above the heart. Around town, people called him a hero, the surgeon who saved lives and shook hands with senators. Inside our home, he was the keeper of standards, the voice of family pride. "You're a Bennett," he'd say, as if the name itself was an unbreakable shield. For some, maybe it was. For me, it felt more like a suit I could never quite grow into. There's a certain loneliness to being the other in your own family. My brother Connor fit perfectly into the frame our parents had painted: athletic, charming, destined for med school from the time he could spell biology. He never seemed to question the path set out for him, and our father rewarded that obedience with open praise. Meanwhile, I grew up loving stories, legal thrillers, old courtroom dramas on late-night TV, the sound of a judge's gavel restoring order. I wanted to understand people, to defend the ones who didn't have a voice. But dreams that didn't fit the Bennett script were quietly set aside, dismissed as phases. Every report card, every college brochure was a silent battle between who I was and who I was supposed to be. The message was clear: doctors save lives, lawyers argue with them. The day I told my family about law school, the kitchen was full of half-finished coffee and the low hum of the radio. I'd been offered a full scholarship, my own hard-won victory earned late at night, while Connor slept soundly upstairs. I remember my hands shaking, but my voice stayed steady. "I want to study law," I said, and for a moment the world seemed to pause. My mother's face went pale. Connor raised his eyebrows. My father didn't look at me. He stared out the window, the muscles in his jaw working as if chewing over something bitter. "You're an embarrassment," he finally said, the words brittle and precise. "Don't come home until you're worth the Bennett name." It wasn't a fight, not really. It was a verdict. And like all verdicts, it carried a finality I wasn't ready to accept. In America, we like to tell ourselves that family is unconditional blood, is thicker than water, as the saying goes. But anyone who's ever fallen out of step with family tradition knows how quickly that water can run cold. I've met dozens of people from all walks of life who've been cast out for loving the wrong person, choosing the wrong career, or daring to dream outside the box built for them. My story is personal, but it's not unique. There's the son who became a musician instead of a banker, the daughter who left her small town to chase art in the city, the friend who married for love instead of status. Sometimes stepping outside the family line isn't an act of rebellion, it's an act of survival. That morning I packed my bags quietly, folding clothes between textbooks and legal pads. My mother stood in the hallway, hands wringing the edge of her robe, lips pressed tight as if holding back 1,000 words. "I wish things were different," she whispered. I did too. But love, when bound by fear, can become a silent bystander. Connor lingered at the stairs, torn between loyalty to the family and the awkwardness of a sibling he no longer recognized. The car ride to the bus station was wordless, the road ahead stretching farther than I'd ever imagined. In that silence, I began to realize that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away without looking back. There are so many ways a family can fracture, some loud and sudden, others slow as erosion. I think what hurt most wasn't my father's anger, but the way it rewrote every memory I'd held dear. Even years later, when I hear certain songs or taste my mother's favorite tea, there's a phantom ache, a reminder of what was lost. But pain, I've learned, is a powerful teacher. It shapes you, sharpens you, asks you to choose resentment or resilience. Some nights, resentment wins. But more often I reach for resilience, trusting that even in the shadow of rejection, something new can grow. Here's what I wish someone had told me back then: being cast out doesn't mean you're unworthy. Sometimes it means you're finally becoming who you were meant to be. The world is full of black sheep people who dared to want something different, who risked love or truth or their own happiness for a chance at authenticity. Maybe you're one of them. If so, know this: it's not the leaving that defines you. It's the courage to keep walking when the map runs out. Looking back, I see now that the day I left home wasn't just an ending. It was an invitation to write a new chapter on my own terms. The world outside the Bennett house was bigger, harder, lonelier than I'd ever dreamed, but it was also alive with possibility. With each step away from the life I'd outgrown, I carried with me a hope as fragile as it was fierce that one day I'd find my own version of home, built not on tradition or pride, but on truth. And so began my journey, not toward vindication, but toward understanding. The pain of being an outcast never fully disappeared, but it softened over time, making room for ambition, for grit, for the first taste of freedom. I worked, I studied. I learned what it meant to survive outside the shelter of a famous name. And with every challenge, every small win, I built a little more faith in myself. Sometimes what feels like exile is really an open door. The lessons I carried from that day have shaped every choice since. Family pride can lift you up, yes, but when it turns toxic, it can also be the thing that sets you free. If you're struggling under the weight of someone else's expectations, remember this: your worth isn't measured by their approval. You are more than their dreams for you. You are the story you choose to write every single day. And as my journey continued through heartbreak, through hunger, through tiny triumphs and bruised beginnings, I learned that the hardest goodbyes are sometimes the first step toward the truest kind of belonging. But that's a lesson I'd have to live to understand. Because the real story, the one about resilience, risk, and rewriting what family can mean, was just getting started. Growing up in the Bennett household every day felt like walking across a freshly polished floor, beautiful on the surface, but always a little too slippery beneath your feet. My father believed that reputation was everything, and our family's was sterling. He reminded us often, sometimes with pride, sometimes with pressure people are watching. We don't fail. We don't cause scenes. We rise. There was an unspoken rule in our home that mistakes were not lessons, but blemishes. Things to be scrubbed away quickly, never spoken of again. That mindset shaped the very air we breathed. Even laughter had its limits. Too loud, and it bordered on inappropriate. I grew up with a sense that joy, like ambition, needed permission. My brother Connor wore the Bennett legacy like a second skin. Athletic, bright, always ready with the right answer or a winning smile he made fitting and look effortless. From an early age, he was the golden child. His report cards lined the fridge. His trophies filled the living room shelves. Every weekend, my father would boast about Connor's soccer victories or science fair medals to friends and neighbors, his voice swelling with pride. I remember watching from the hallway, both proud of my brother and painfully aware of my own quietness, my hidden interests. I loved books and debates, but in our family, there wasn't a shelf for those kinds of victories. It's easy as a child to measure your worth against someone else's yardstick, especially when the adults in your life keep pointing to it. My teachers sometimes asked if I'd go into medicine just like my brother was planning. A future surgeon, they'd say, eyes shining with expectation. I'd smile politely, but inside I wondered why being a good listener, a storyteller, or a defender of the underdog didn't carry the same weight. Sometimes I'd slip out to the backyard, curl up with a novel, and imagine a world where being different wasn't a disappointment. But sooner or later I always came back inside, hoping for a nod of approval that rarely came. Perfection in the Bennett house was a moving target. I remember one Thanksgiving when Connor accidentally spilled cranberry sauce on the tablecloth. The room went silent, all eyes on him. My mother rushed to wipe it up before my father saw, whispering, "It's all right, accidents happen." But when I once dropped a stack of dinner plates, the reaction was different. My father's face hardened and he called me careless. It took years to understand that it wasn't the broken plates or stained linens that mattered. It was the story our family told about itself, the myth of flawless success passed down from generation to generation. Looking back, I realize how many families, not just mine, get tangled in this story of conditional love. I once had a college roommate, Mia, whose family ran a bakery in Kansas. Her older sister won awards for her cakes. Mia just wanted to play the guitar. "Every time I perform, my parents say I'm wasting my time," she told me. "But it's the only thing that makes me feel alive." The details were different, but the feeling was the same. When love depends on achievement, every failure becomes a reason to doubt your place at the table. It's a lonely way to grow up. In a country built on the idea of the American dream, we talk a lot about success, but not enough about the cost of chasing it. I met classmates who carried secret wounds, straight-A students terrified of falling short, athletes who played through pain rather than disappoint their parents' kids who hid their true selves for fear of losing the approval they craved. We don't often talk about how making it sometimes means losing yourself along the way. If you've ever felt that pressure, know that you're not alone. Perfection is a heavy burden, and it rarely brings the comfort it promises. What I learned slowly, and sometimes painfully, is that living in someone else's shadow doesn't make your own light any less real. I spent years quietly excelling in school, winning debate tournaments, helping friends navigate conflicts, all the while keeping my successes tucked away like secrets. When I brought home a blue ribbon from a county speech contest, my mother hung it on the side of the fridge, half hidden behind grocery lists and calendars. It was there, but only just. And yet I cherished it as proof that my dreams mattered even if no one else understood. The real lesson came later in the quiet spaces between expectations and reality. I began to see that my father's need for control came from his own childhood, a time when mistakes meant missed opportunities and vulnerability could be dangerous. I learned to forgive the ways he tried to mold us, even as I resolved to break free of that mold myself. Maybe that's the hardest part of growing up, not just surviving the rules, but understanding why they exist and deciding which ones you want to keep. Still, there were moments of unexpected grace. My mother, though quiet in her defiance, sometimes left little notes in my school books. "I'm proud of you. Don't give up." Even Connor, in his own way, would stand up for me at family dinners, deflecting our father's criticism, or cracking a joke when things got tense. These glimpses of kindness reminded me that love can survive even in tough soil. It just needs a chance to take root. So if you're listening and you grew up in a house where only certain kinds of success counted, I hope you'll hear this. You are more than any trophy grade or title. Your worth isn't defined by someone else's idea of perfection. Families are messy dreams, are stubborn, and real love doesn't keep score. It took me a long time to claim my own story to realize that being the silent daughter was just the first chapter in a much bigger book. I was about to discover that leaving home meant more than packing a bag. It meant stepping into the unknown and trusting that I could build something better from scratch. Sometimes the hardest part is letting go of the need to prove yourself and learning to believe deep down that you're enough. The day I finally left the Bennett house, I wasn't just running away from old expectations. I was moving toward a life that would demand every bit of courage I had, every lesson I'd learned in the shadow of perfection. Out there, beyond the reach of family pride, I would have to discover who Alexis Bennett really was and whether her dreams could survive the weight of the world. The first night away from home, I slept on a friend's old futon in a drafty apartment above a bakery. The city outside my window was so loud and alive, but inside, everything felt unfamiliar and hollow. I remember lying awake, clutching my phone and fighting the urge to call my mother just to hear someone say my name with love. But pride, as heavy as it was, kept me silent. Even the walls felt like strangers painted in colors I would never have chosen, with streetlight shadows shifting restlessly across the ceiling. That night it finally hit me. No matter how hard I'd worked, I was truly on my own for the first time. There was no family safety net, no hand waiting to catch me if I fell. Just me, a battered duffel bag, and a city that didn't care who I was. Survival, I quickly learned, is 1,000 small choices made every single day. In the beginning, it was all about necessities: finding affordable food, a second-hand winter coat, a place to wash my clothes. I picked up a job at a nearby coffee shop, working late shifts so I could keep my mornings free for classes. The work was humbling: mopping floors, scrubbing dishes, learning to smile at customers who never bothered to look up from their phones. Every paycheck was stretched to its limits, with just enough left over for groceries and bus fare. Once, after a particularly hard week, I treated myself to a paperback novel from a thrift store, one small luxury that reminded me I still deserved a little joy. There were days when loneliness hit me like a wave. It was in the small moments: a silent dinner eaten over the sink, a missed birthday, a favorite song on the radio that reminded me of home. Sometimes I would see parents and children laughing together at the bus stop and feel an ache so deep I could barely breathe. I wasn't alone in this feeling. During my shifts, I met students from all over the country, some just as far from home as I was. We swapped stories about absent families, strange roommates, and the weird comfort of instant noodles. In those moments, I realized that the city was full of people carrying quiet heartbreaks, each of us trying to build a new life from scratch. The practical challenges were just as real. I once arrived at class soaking wet because my umbrella broke in a downpour and I couldn't afford a cab. On another day, I discovered my wallet missing after a long shift, gone along with the bus pass I needed for the week. I cried in the campus bathroom, frustrated and exhausted, and then walked home in the rain. Looking back, it's almost funny how those small disasters felt enormous at the time, but every one of them forced me to get a little tougher to ask for help when I needed it, and to remember that setbacks weren't the end of the world. Sometimes, though, the hardest battles were the ones inside my head. At night, self-doubt crept in. What if my father was right? What if I'd thrown away everything for a dream I couldn't reach? Whenever the fear became too much, I'd reread the acceptance letter from law school, tracing the embossed letters as proof that I belonged, even if nobody else believed it yet. I thought about all the black sheep who had gone before me, people I admired, like Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who faced rejection and still changed the world. Their stories were a lifeline, a reminder that it was okay to struggle, and that grit was sometimes more valuable than approval. I'll never forget the winter my heat was shut off because I fell behind on the bill. I layered up in sweaters and borrowed blankets, making hot tea with the last of my change. My friend Jasmine, a fellow barista, found out, and insisted I stay with her until I got back on my feet. Her kindness taught me something vital. Even when family lets you down, you can find community in unexpected places. We spent those cold nights talking about our dreams and our fears, building a friendship that would last long after the worst winter ended. That's the thing about hardship. It can bring out a stubborn kind of hope, the sort that grows stronger in company. My experience is not unique. Across the country, young adults leave home every year for school or work, many with less than I had. According to recent studies, nearly 30% of college students in America have experienced food or housing insecurity. Some never tell their families, afraid of being seen as failures. Others band together, creating new families of choice in dorm rooms and coffee shops, learning to lean on one another. If you're out there feeling like you're the only one struggling, please know you're not alone and your story matters. Looking back, those first years were full of mistakes and messy beginnings. I worked too many hours, neglected my health, and said yes to things I didn't believe in, just to avoid disappointing anyone. But each misstep was a lesson shaping me into someone stronger and more self-reliant. If there's a truth to surviving your own worst days, it's this: you can start over again and again. And each time you'll discover a new layer of resilience. It doesn't make you invincible, but it does make you brave. The lesson I want to share is simple. Don't let fear of being alone keep you from pursuing what sets your soul on fire. The world outside your comfort zone is frightening, but it's also where real growth happens. When you're forced to rely on yourself, you start to recognize your own resourcefulness and strength. Those small victories, the first paycheck, the first semester passed, the first real friend, are more meaningful than any applause that comes too easily. As I pushed through the daily grind, something in me began to change. My identity slowly shifted from the one who left to the one who survived. I started to take pride in every obstacle I overcame, knowing that my story was being written with every step. I found comfort in little routines, late-night study sessions, weekend shifts, the quiet satisfaction of making ends meet by sheer willpower. Each of these moments became a building block not just for my future career, but for a sense of self-worth that couldn't be taken away. When spring finally arrived, I walked through the city streets and realized that the place I once feared had become a kind of home. The faces at the coffee shop were familiar, the city's rhythm steady and welcoming. My past still lingered, but it no longer defined me. Instead, I was defined by the choices I made every day, the choice to keep going, to reach out, to believe in myself despite everything. Next would come law school with its own challenges and unexpected opportunities. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time I felt ready to meet it on my own terms. Because survival, I had learned, isn't just about getting by, it's about finding meaning in the struggle and strength in the journey. And sometimes the hardest beginnings lay the foundation for the brightest chapters yet to come. Law school was nothing like the courtroom dramas I'd grown up watching on TV. There were no grand speeches or last-minute confessions, just rows of tired students hunched over heavy books and the endless tap-tap of laptops echoing in old lecture halls. I'd pictured myself as a crusader for justice, but my reality was a blur of case law caffeine and anxious late-night study sessions. The first weeks were a shock to my system. The professors were sharp, their questions relentless. No one cared about my last name or my story, only whether I could think on my feet and back it up with facts. At first I worried I was out of my depth, that all the courage it had taken to get here wouldn't be enough to keep me afloat. It didn't help that the social landscape of law school was its own kind of trial. Many of my classmates came from families like mine, but with the money and connections still intact. They formed cliques with e-study groups filled with inside jokes and weekend brunches I could never quite afford. I envied their confidence, the way they moved through the world, as if every door would open just because they knocked. But I also learned quickly that some of those doors hid their own pressures and secrets. One girl, Ashley, confided to me after a long day in the library that she felt like an imposter, always measuring herself against her older siblings, who were already partners in big firms. Sometimes the expectations you inherit weigh more than the ones you create for yourself. To make ends meet, I worked as a barista at a campus coffee shop. The job was far from glamorous, but it kept me grounded. There's something humbling about serving espresso to professors who would later grill you in class or quietly sliding a free cookie to a classmate who looked like they needed a break. The work also connected me to people I might never have met otherwise. My manager, Mrs. Patel, had moved to the U.S. from India to give her children a better life. She'd studied law herself back home, but credentials didn't transfer. Now she poured her ambition into her family and the little shop she ran with such pride. Her story made me realize that starting over wasn't something to be ashamed of. Sometimes it was the bravest choice of all. Some nights, exhaustion hit me so hard, I would lay my head down on the kitchen table and wonder if I could really keep going. There were times I failed an oral argument that went sideways, a paper marked with more red than black. I remember the sting of my first bad grade, the urge to call my father just to hear his advice, and the sharp reminder that I was doing this on my own. But every mistake taught me something valuable. I learned how to bounce back, how to ask for help, and how to forgive myself when perfection was out of reach. I saw classmates stumble and get up again too. We were all in our own ways, fighting battles that no one else could see. A turning point came during the second semester when Professor Blake called on me to summarize a complex case. My heart pounded in my ears, but I stood up voice steady and made my argument. After class, she pulled me aside. "You have a mind for the law and a fire that can't be taught," she said. It was the first time anyone in this new world had recognized my potential. Professor Blake became an unexpected ally, sharing stories of her own early struggles and reminding me that the law belonged to those with grit, not just privilege. Her encouragement made all the difference. Sometimes all it takes is one person believing in you to shift the whole course of your journey. Outside of class, I found support in unexpected places. Jasmine, my old friend from the coffee shop, was my confidant through every setback and small triumph. We cheered each other on, swapped study tips, and sometimes just sat together in silence when words ran out. I met other black sheep like me, first-generation students, single parents, immigrants, who'd left everything behind to build a new future. We became each other's chosen family, a circle of encouragement in a world that could be so quick to judge. If I'd learned anything, it was that hardship often attracts resilience, and the people who show up for you in tough times are worth more than any inherited legacy. I realized, too, that every person in law school had a secret burden. An anxiety about failing, a worry about belonging, a fear that they'd never live up to the person everyone else expected them to be. There's a myth in competitive environments that the winners don't struggle, but I saw the truth up close. The most successful students were often the most self-critical, their confidence a mask for deeper doubts. Understanding this made me more compassionate both with others and with myself. We were all in the end just people learning how to get back up after falling. One night as I walked home beneath a sky thick with stars, I thought about how far I'd come from the frightened girl who'd first left home. Law school wasn't just shaping my mind, it was teaching me about endurance, humility, and the power of community. I realized that achievement meant little if it wasn't accompanied by empathy, and that true success was measured not by the trophies on your shelf, but by the people you helped along the way. Those lessons stayed with me far beyond graduation. If you're listening and you've ever felt lost in a sea of competition or doubted your place in a world built on privilege, let my story remind you belong. The path may not be easy, but you will find your allies, your moments of growth, and the quiet pride of knowing you earned your place. Law school taught me more than statutes and precedents. It taught me how to survive and even to thrive on my own terms. As my final year approached, an unexpected opportunity appeared, a chance to clerk for a federal judge, the kind of position I once thought was out of reach for someone like me. I felt the old fear bubble up, but I applied anyway, bolstered by the lessons and friendships I'd collected along the way. Whether I succeeded or failed, I knew this. I had already come farther than anyone had expected, including myself. And the next chapter, no matter how daunting, would be one I'd face with newfound courage and hope. The first day I walked into the federal courthouse as a law clerk, my hands were trembling so much I had to grip my portfolio tighter than usual. I remember pausing in the marble lobby, heart pounding, trying to look confident as I smoothed invisible wrinkles from my thrift store blazer. No one there knew my story, not the security guard, not the attorneys bustling through the doors, not even the judge I would be working for. That anonymity felt like both a blessing and a challenge. For once, there were no Bennett expectations looming over my shoulder, no old friends or family to witness my missteps. In this new world, I could define myself by my actions, not my last name. It was equal parts freeing and terrifying. My judge, Honors Marjorie Lee, was a legend stern, but fair respected by colleagues and feared by the few who tried to bluff in her courtroom. She set the bar high for everyone, especially her clerks. Our mornings began with stacks of motions to read afternoons, with hours of research, and evenings that often ended with her favorite phrase, "Clarity, Alexis. Clarity above all." Sometimes I'd work late into the night, the glow of my computer, the only light in the office, double and triple checking every citation. I quickly learned that excellence in law was a quiet, meticulous business built on details that nobody else would ever see. Outside the courthouse, my life was a tapestry of quiet victories. I made rent every month by budgeting down to the last cent, occasionally splurging on a good meal with friends who became my family of choice. I found moments of joy in the ordinary trips to the Saturday market, shared laughter over mismatched mugs of coffee, the luxury of fresh-cut flowers on my windowsill. It struck me how different these triumphs felt from the medals and report cards my father once celebrated. These were not public achievements. No one snapped photos or shared them on social media, but they mattered deeply, building the foundation of a life I could finally call my own. There were setbacks, too. Some days I felt like a fraud, afraid my luck would run out. Once I lost an important brief and spent a panicked night rewriting it from scratch, convinced I'd ruined everything. Instead of anger, Judge Lee called me in the next morning and told me, "We all fail. It's what you do next that counts." Her words landed with the weight of real experience. She'd made her own share of mistakes and had the humility to admit them. That conversation shifted something in me. I started to see my journey not as a test I had to pass, but as a process one that would always involve learning recovery and resilience. Over time, I met more people whose quiet perseverance inspired me. One of the other clerks, David, commuted 2 hours each way so he could afford to support his family back home. Another, Elena, was the first in her family to go to college, let alone law school. We bonded over shared struggles and traded tips on balancing ambition with the realities of life. Their stories made me realize that the world was full of people chasing dreams nobody else understood, working long hours for a shot at something better. These connections became my anchor on difficult days and a source of hope on the best ones. If I learned one lesson during those clerkship years, it's that most real progress happens away from the spotlight. It's easy to think that only visible success matters, that what isn't praised in public doesn't count. But every late-night edit, every patient answer to a judge's question, every time I picked myself up and tried again, they all added up. Like stones in a riverbed, these small, unseen efforts shaped my path far more than any headline ever could. I began to cherish the process itself, not just the outcomes. That shift in perspective made even the hardest days feel purposeful. One spring afternoon, Judge Lee handed me a letter of recommendation she'd written for me. She had described me as steadfast, insightful, and unafraid of hard work. I stood in her office, blinking back tears. For the first time, someone I admired saw the real me, not just the black sheep, not just a survivor, but someone who had earned her place by showing up day after day when no one was watching. That letter became a keepsake, a tangible reminder that my worth wasn't conditional on a family legacy or public applause. There's a kind of dignity in doing the right thing when no one is there to give you credit. I remembered the stories my mother once told me about her own grandmother, a woman who cleaned houses during the day and read books to her children at night, insisting that knowledge was its own kind of wealth. Success, I realized, was not about recognition, but about building a life rooted in values you can stand behind. Even when the world doesn't see your effort, you do, and that's what stays with you. The bigger lesson maybe is this: don't underestimate the value of the work you do in silence. The long hours, the extra effort, the willingness to improve after a mistake, they all build strength and character. Whether you're making lattes, studying for exams, raising a family, or balancing 100 unseen tasks, it all matters. Each challenge overcome each kindness, extended each new skill, learn it is a brick in the foundation of your life story. And sometimes the strongest people are those whose triumphs go unnoticed by everyone except themselves. As my clerkship ended, I realized I was ready for the next challenge, not because I had all the answers, but because I had learned to trust my own process. With Judge Lee's letter in hand and a quiet pride in my heart, I stepped forward into the world, determined to continue building a legacy defined not by family expectations, but by resilience and integrity. The next chapter would bring new surprises, old wounds reopened, and the chance to face my past in ways I never expected. But at last, I knew my story was truly my own. It arrived on a Thursday, tucked in with the usual stack of bills and flyers, a thick envelope, creamy and elegant, my name handwritten in blue ink across the front. I stared at it for a long time before touching it as if it might vanish if I blinked. The return address was familiar, the old Bennett house, the one I hadn't set foot in since the day I left. My heart stumbled in my chest. I turned it over in my hands, searching for a clue. Then finally, with shaking fingers, I opened it. Inside was an invitation to Connor's wedding, embossed and formal, every detail carefully scripted. But it was the folded note tucked in behind it that made my breath catch. I hope you'll come. I miss you. Mom. It was the first time in years her words had reached me unfiltered by anyone else. I wish I could say I knew right away what to do. Instead, I placed the invitation on my kitchen table, where it sat for days, sometimes a wait, sometimes a question, sometimes a door I didn't know if I was ready to open. Each time I glanced at it, memories flooded back birthdays around the dining room table, the bitter echo of my father's voice, the way my mother used to tuck a strand of hair behind my ear before school. But along with the nostalgia came the old pain, raw and unhealed. Could I really go back? Did I even belong anymore? I wrestled with those questions in the quiet moments, knowing that my answer would mean more than just one weekend. It was about reclaiming a piece of myself I'd almost given up. Real life is rarely as neat as the stories we tell. I thought about how many people find themselves torn between past wounds and present hope. My friend Elena, whose parents stopped speaking to her when she married someone outside their faith, once confided, "Sometimes I wish I could just show up at family dinner and have it be like old times." But she, like me, knew that going back meant more than simply walking through a door. It meant facing the complicated people and emotions we tried so hard to leave behind. Family reunions, holidays, weddings, they can be moments of healing or reminders of everything that's broken. The decision to attend isn't always about forgiveness. Sometimes it's about bravery. I found myself replaying old scenes in my mind, my father's rigid rules, my brother's easy laughter, the long silence that followed my departure. I wondered how much had changed and whether there was space for someone like me, a black sheep with a new life, new scars, and new strength. My mother's note tugged at my heart, softening some of the anger that had kept me away for so long. I remembered the times she'd tried to shield me in small ways, her quiet encouragement when the house felt coldest. Even her simple wish for my presence was a thread of connection, fragile, but real. After nearly a week, I called Jasmine. She listened as I stumbled through my doubts, her voice gentle on the other end of the line. "You don't have to have it all figured out," she told me. "You just have to decide what's right for you right now." That advice settled something inside me. It wasn't about making peace with the past in one grand gesture. It was about choosing moment by moment how to move forward. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is to show up not for others' approval, but for your own healing. As the wedding date approached, I sat down and wrote a letter to myself. I acknowledged all the hurt, all the fear, all the pride I'd carried since leaving home. I reminded myself that I was no longer the girl who left in the middle of the night, but a woman who had survived, thrived, and built a life she was proud of. This invitation, I realized, wasn't just about Connor's big day. It was about my right to take up space in my own family story, to walk back into the places that had once closed their doors to me, and to hold my head high, no matter who greeted me on the other side. The morning I bought my plane ticket, I felt a mix of nerves and anticipation. Would my father say anything at all? Would Connor welcome me or treat me like a stranger? And most of all, would I recognize the person I'd become, standing in the place where I'd once felt so small? It was a risk, but one I knew I needed to take, not to rewrite history, but to see finally what might be possible now. I was determined to be there as myself, without apology or disguise. When the day finally arrived, I packed my suitcase with care, slipping Judge Lee's letter of recommendation between my clothes, a quiet reminder of how far I'd come. On the flight, I watched the clouds drift by and thought of all the stories of reconciliation and return I'd heard over the years, stories that didn't always end with a hug or a perfect speech, but sometimes simply with the courage to show up. That's what I wanted for myself, the courage to be present, to listen, and to let the past be part of my story without letting it define my future. If you've ever stood at the edge of a decision like this, torn between old hurts and new beginnings, I hope you know you're not alone. Returning to the people and places that shaped us, no matter how painful, can be an act of hope as much as of forgiveness. The lesson I learned is that healing is rarely instant and never simple. But every step you take toward your own truth makes the road a little clearer for those who follow. As I stepped off the plane and made my way toward the family I hadn't seen in years, my heart pounded with anticipation and fear. But beneath it all, there was a quiet sense of readiness, a belief that come what may I was strong enough to face whatever waited for me on the other side of the door. My journey home was only beginning, and with it a new chapter that would test every lesson I'd learned about courage, belonging, and what it really means to forgive. The drive to my family's home felt like winding backward through time. Every familiar turn and tree brought back memories, some gentle and others sharp as glass. The Bennett house looked unchanged, white shutters, a manicured lawn, the porch light glowing as if it had been waiting for me all these years. My hands trembled as I rang the doorbell. For a moment I wondered if anyone would answer, or if this was all a test of courage I'd have to pass alone. Then the door opened, and there was my mother, smaller than I remembered, but her eyes just as kind. "You're here," she whispered, her voice trembling. She hugged me with a fierceness that startled us both. The past, it seemed, could be set aside, if only for a moment, by the simple act of showing up. Inside, the house buzzed with pre-wedding chaos. Relatives milled around, laughter mingling with the clatter of dishes and the scent of roasting chicken. My brother Connor glanced up from a stack of seating charts, his face flickering with something I couldn't read: surprise, guilt, maybe a flash of old rivalry. "You made it," he said awkwardly, as if unsure what else to offer. His fiancée, Charlotte, swept in with a warmth that made the room feel less dangerous. She greeted me like an old friend, looping me into conversations about travel law and all the wedding details she hoped would go smoothly. For a moment, I relaxed. Maybe I'd worried too much, maybe time could heal more than I gave it credit for. But old wounds have a way of reopening when you least expect them. As the rehearsal dinner began, I felt the familiar weight of scrutiny. My father sat at the head of the table, his expression carefully blank. The conversation turned to family news and professional triumphs. Cousins rattled off their latest promotions. Aunts recounted tales of medical miracles. Someone mentioned my absence from past holidays, the remark slipping out sharper than intended. The table went quiet. My heart thudded. I answered gently that work had kept me busy, my voice steady, but my hands tight in my lap. The moment passed, but I could feel everyone recalibrating, trying to fit me back into the story they'd written in my absence. The evening's turning point came when Charlotte's friend Sarah, a young attorney, asked about my career. "You work in law, right?" she asked brightly, looking past the polite vagueness I'd tried to maintain. Before I could answer, Charlotte interjected. "Oh, Alexis isn't just in law, she's a judge. The youngest one in her circuit, actually." The words hung in the air, silencing the chatter. Every head turned. My father's fork paused mid-air. Connor's eyes widened in disbelief. The family's narrative of who I was and what I'd become crumbled in that instant. I could see the shock and, yes, beneath it a flicker of something like pride, even if they'd never admit it aloud. There's a unique kind of vulnerability in having your achievements revealed unexpectedly. I felt exposed, both exhilarated and a little scared. Charlotte beamed at me, delighted to share the news, while others asked hesitant, then increasingly admiring questions. "Why didn't you tell us?" An aunt pressed her tone, a blend of awe and accusation. I answered honestly, I wanted to earn my place on my own terms, not as a Bennett, but as Alexis. There was a hush then, quiet nods of understanding. The mood shifted. Old hierarchies wobbled. For the first time, I felt the power of owning my story without apology, without needing permission. That night, I caught glimpses of my father watching me across the room. His expression was hard to read. Maybe regret, maybe respect. After dessert, he approached, standing stiffly at my side. "You've done well for yourself," he said, his voice low. It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as he'd come. I thanked him, letting the silence between us fill with what words couldn't say. Sometimes reconciliation begins not with grand gestures, but with small acknowledgments of change. Others, too, approached with questions, encouragement, even apologies for assumptions they'd made. I realized that by hiding my journey, I'd robbed myself and them of the chance to connect honestly. My story, messy and imperfect, gave permission for others to drop their own masks. That's a lesson I hope you carry with you. Sometimes the bravest thing isn't succeeding in silence, but sharing your journey openly, letting your growth inspire growth in those around you. After the last guest left, my mother found me in the quiet kitchen, her eyes full of tears. "I'm so proud of you, Alexis," she whispered, voice breaking. "You always were." We stood together, not trying to fix the past, but simply grateful to be present for this moment. I understood then that coming home wasn't about erasing old wounds, but about seeing each other clearly, faults, strengths, and all. Every family has its shadows. What matters is the courage to step into the light together, or apart. As I lay in my childhood bed that night, I felt lighter than I had in years. The road to this moment had been long, winding, and often lonely, but it had brought me back to myself. I slept deeply, dreaming not of the past, but of the future I could now shape on my own terms. There would be more challenges ahead, more difficult conversations, but I was ready to face them. The morning of the wedding felt like the calm after a storm, soft light filtering through the curtains, the old house unusually quiet, as everyone prepared for the day ahead. I wandered down the hallway, hearing laughter and snippets of conversations behind closed doors, but I also felt the hush of anticipation. Today was about Connor and Charlotte, but under the surface it was also about everything that had changed between us as a family. The night before, my secret had been revealed, and nothing about our dynamic felt quite the same. I noticed it in the way relatives greeted me, more respectful, a little cautious, their questions tinged with curiosity instead of dismissal. Years of old hierarchies, silent resentments, and unspoken regrets seemed to hang in the air, waiting for someone to break the spell. My first real conversation that morning was with Connor. He found me in the backyard, coffee mugs in hand, his tie still loose around his neck. "You surprised everyone last night," he said, trying to sound casual, but his voice carried a note of awe I'd never heard before. He asked me about my journey, how I'd made it, what kept me going when things got hard. For the first time in years, our talk wasn't weighed down by competition or old jealousy, but by real curiosity and respect. We laughed about childhood pranks, shared some honest confessions about our fears, and for a moment I saw the brother I'd missed, not the golden son, but someone vulnerable and hopeful, just like me. Later, I sat with my mother in the sunlit kitchen. She reached across the table and squeezed my hand, her eyes full of apology and pride. "I wish I'd stood up for you more," she whispered, her voice trembling. I told her I understood the pressures she faced, the fear of rocking the boat, the love she tried to show in quiet ways. We cried a little, then laughed about how stubborn the Bennett women could be. It wasn't a sweeping reconciliation, but it was honest. We agreed that the past couldn't be undone, but the future could be different if we kept choosing honesty over silence. In that moment, forgiveness felt less like letting someone off the hook and more like letting myself finally exhale. Facing my father was the hardest. He found me in the den, hands folded posture, rigid as always. There was a long silence, punctuated only by the ticking of the old mantel clock. "I never expected you'd go so far," he finally admitted, his voice softer than I remembered. I told him that leaving had been the hardest thing I'd ever done, but that I'd needed to find my own way. He nodded, not quite ready to apologize, but willing to acknowledge my strength. That small concession was more than I'd ever dared hope for. I realized then that parents sometimes struggle to love their children outside the limits of their own fears, and that understanding them doesn't mean you have to accept those limits for yourself. Afterward, cousins and aunts stopped by, some with apologies, others with quiet congratulations. My story, once a whispered disappointment, was now being recast as an example of resilience. I could see the ripple effect. A teenage cousin asked me for advice about college. An uncle shared his own regrets about family estrangements. It struck me how powerful one honest conversation can be. Sometimes breaking the silence in a family opens the door for others to step forward too. The lesson was clear: when you share your truth, you give others permission to do the same. That's how families heal, one conversation at a time. The ceremony itself was beautiful, sun-drenched and hopeful. Charlotte radiant as she walked down the aisle, Connor blinking back tears. I watched my brother make his vows surrounded by people who loved him, and I felt a quiet pride not just in him, but in all of us for coming this far. Afterward, at the reception, Charlotte's friends introduced me as the judge, asking for stories from court, for advice about their own ambitions. I realized I had become in a small way a role model, not because I was perfect, but because I had survived and kept moving forward. Real-life examples of reconciliation don't always look like storybook endings. I thought of my friend Elena, who after years of estrangement had dinner with her parents for the first time since her wedding. It was awkward, she told me, but it was a start. The courage to face old wounds doesn't erase the past, but it creates room for new chapters to unfold. What matters is showing up with honesty, humility, and a willingness to listen. As the night wound down, I found myself outside beneath the stars, watching the lights from the house flicker through the trees. I reflected on how much had changed and how far we all had come. My family wasn't magically healed, but we had taken the first real steps toward understanding and respect. I was proud of the boundaries I'd set and of the bridges we'd begun to build. Every family carries old pain, but it's never too late to start rewriting the story, one conversation, one act of courage at a time. The biggest lesson, perhaps, is that real power doesn't come from winning arguments or holding on to grudges. It comes from the willingness to face discomfort, to forgive, and to stand firmly in your own truth, even when it's hard. In doing so, you give others the chance to grow with you. As I walked back inside to join the laughter and music, I felt lighter than I had in years. I was no longer the family's black sheep or a silent outsider. I was simply Alexis' daughter's sister friend, and in my own right, a leader. The hardest battles had forged a quiet confidence I would carry into every part of my life from that moment forward. There's a certain kind of magic that happens when you realize the room that once made you small now amplifies your voice. The day after Connor and Charlotte's wedding, family and friends gathered for brunch, a tradition in our family meant for stories, laughter, and gentle recovery from the celebration before. As I walked in, sunlight poured through the tall windows, casting everything in a golden haze. For years, these rooms had made me feel invisible, my dreams too loud, my questions too sharp. But now, every glance held curiosity, respect, even a little pride. It wasn't the titles or achievements that changed things. It was the way I stood open, unashamed, no longer hiding who I'd become. Throughout the morning, relatives and guests stopped by to talk. Some offered congratulations, others quiet confessions about their own struggles with family expectations or regrets about old misunderstandings. My cousin Leela, once the family's rising star, told me how she nearly switched careers after college, but backed down, afraid of disappointing their parents. "Seeing you up there, Alexis," she admitted, "makes me wonder what else is possible for me." Her words lingered with me, a reminder that sometimes the most radical act isn't forging ahead alone, but showing others it can be done. That's how change spreads, one story, one brave decision at a time. I answered questions about my work, but people wanted to know more than legal victories. They wanted to hear about perseverance, how I kept going when things fell apart, what kept me motivated in lonely seasons. I told them about long nights in borrowed apartments, friendships built over cheap coffee, and the slow, sometimes painful process of forgiving those who once doubted me. It wasn't easy, I confessed, but every small step made me stronger. Success isn't about never falling, it's about getting back up even when no one else is watching. I saw nods of recognition around the table. Everyone, it seemed, was carrying a secret hope or regret, waiting for permission to believe their story mattered too. In that moment, I understood something I wish I'd learned sooner. Belonging isn't about fitting into old molds. It's about creating new spaces where honesty and growth are welcome. At that table, the old power dynamics faded. Titles, grudges, and past mistakes dissolved under the warmth of genuine connection. I felt lighter, no longer the black sheep, but a catalyst for deeper conversations and authentic relationships. Real leadership, I realized, isn't about commanding attention. It's about listening, sharing vulnerability, and inviting others to do the same. I thought of a friend from law school, David, who once confided that he nearly dropped out after his first semester. I was terrified he'd told me not of failing the classes, but of failing the people who believed in me. It took hearing another student share a similar struggle for David to find the courage to keep going. That's the power of openness. It breaks isolation and reminds us that resilience isn't a solo sport. If you're listening and you've ever felt alone in your ambition or fear, remember your story might be the bridge someone else needs. As the brunch wound down, Charlotte's uncle, a retired judge, approached and shook my hand. "You carry yourself well, Alexis," he said, eyes twinkling. "Your family is lucky to have you back." For a moment, I saw my journey reflected in his expression, the pride, the hardship, the transformation. It struck me how often we wait for others to recognize our worth, when in truth that recognition grows strongest when we give it to ourselves first. Respect flows outward from within, changing the tenor of every room we enter. Looking around, I saw the ripple effect my story had started. Conversations were deeper, laughter, less forced. Even my father, though quiet, seemed changed, no longer presiding over the family like a judge, but participating as one among many. There was no grand reconciliation, but there was peace. Sometimes healing arrives not in sudden miracles, but in the slow accumulation of small, honest moments. The lesson for me was clear. The most profound power lies in authenticity. When you lead with your true self, you invite others to do the same. The myth of the perfect family, the need to uphold a polished image at all costs, fell away as we shared our real experiences, messy, beautiful, unfinished. I felt grateful not just for my own growth, but for the possibility that my journey had helped others see their potential more clearly. As the sun faded and guests began to drift home, I found myself standing at the edge of the backyard, breathing in the gentle scent of cut grass and blooming lilies. I realized I had rewritten my own story, not as a footnote in someone else's narrative, but as the author of my own. That feeling, quiet and steady, was worth more than any award or title. What comes after a homecoming like this? For many, there is a sense of closure, a full circle. But for me, it was the start of something new, a deeper understanding of what family ambition and forgiveness really mean. The days ahead would test this newfound confidence in unexpected ways, as life always does, but now I knew I was ready. Because once you learn to own your story, there is nothing left to fear. As I look back on my journey from the night I left home, clutching a battered suitcase, to the day I returned and stood tall in the place where I once felt so small, I see now that every hardship, every quiet victory shaped the person I've become. The path was never straight. There were moments of doubt, loneliness, and fear, but there were also flashes of unexpected kindness, friendships that turned into chosen family, and the slow, steady building of a life rooted in my own values. The struggles taught me resilience. the losses taught me grace, and every step away from old expectations was really a step closer to discovering my true self. I've learned that home isn't always a place or a set of traditions. Sometimes it's the sense of belonging you carry inside, built one act of courage at a time. I discovered that true success isn't about titles, applause, or even family approval. It's about living honestly and lifting others as you rise. The most lasting victories are the ones nobody else sees. Late nights pushing through doubt, quiet forgiveness, the choice to show up for yourself even when no one is watching. Each of us has the power to break old cycles, to heal, and to rewrite our own stories no matter where we start. If you've ever felt like the outsider, the dreamer, or the black sheep in your family or community, I hope my story reminds you that your journey matters. The rooms that once made you small may one day echo with your laughter. The voices that doubted you might be replaced by new allies, or by your own inner certainty. You don't have to wait for permission to pursue the life you want. You are already enough right here, right now, simply by choosing to move forward with honesty and hope. This isn't just my story. It belongs to anyone who has walked a difficult road and chosen to keep going. Maybe you're in the middle of your own turning point, or maybe you're gathering courage for a change you've long imagined. Wherever you are, know that setbacks are not the end, and every day is a new page to write. The most important chapters aren't written in isolation. They're shaped by every hand you reach, for every truth you share, every moment you let yourself be fully seen. If you found comfort or inspiration in this journey, I invite you to join our community. Subscribe to the channel, leave a comment about your own story, or share this video with someone who needs hope today. Your voice and your presence matter here. Every like, comment, and subscription helps us keep telling real stories that heal, empower, and remind us all that we're not alone. What lesson did this story bring up for you? What part of Alexis's journey felt closest to your own? Thank you for walking this path with me. Together, let's keep building a future where every black sheep finds their place, every voice is valued, and every story, especially yours, gets the chance to be heard. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more stories about resilience, family, and the courage to start again. Your next chapter is waiting, and I can't wait to see what you'll write.